Hello and welcome to Skills to Pay the Bills. In today's segment of The Real Secrets of Money, our host Shirley Liu is at a conference this week, so it is my distinct honor to fill in for Shirley. Our co-host today is Mrs. Patricia Watts-Blackwell, Executive Vice President for Pacific Culture International. And our very special guest today is Dr. Ed James, founder and president of Heal to Be Free. Dr. James is also the radio host for Funerals and Fried Chicken. Wow, that sounds interesting. Please join Patricia and me as we welcome Dr. Ed James. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. James. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Tia.
Good,
Great.
good.
Excited.
Good. Well, I have tons of questions, and I know Patricia has tons of questions as well, so we're going to get right into it. Dr. James, tell us about yourself and about your current organization.
Sure. I'm a physician. I practice radiology, actually diagnostic radiology. Within that, my subspecialty is neuroradiology, which is imaging of the brain and spinal cord. The reason I'm here today, though, is I have a company that deals with issues related to health and wellness. My company is called Heal to Be Free, and I help people to understand the importance of eating the right foods, and I help to explain what exactly those foods are and how eating the wrong foods can lead to death and so much disease and difficulties.
Right. And I want to say right now that you're really unique, because most doctors are, in my opinion, figuring out ways to get you into their offices so they can charge you more money, and they very rarely tell you about foods and herbs and different things that we can do to live longer and maybe not be in the doctor's office so much. So I personally applaud you for that.
Well, thank you.
There's one thing though I've got to know. You're a radio talk show host, and you talk about funerals and fried chicken. Tell me about that. That's interesting.
Well, that's based on a personal experience that I had just a couple of years ago.
Mm.
I was actually attending a funeral of a loved one, and after the service in the basement of the church, the food that was served consisted of fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, a number of different cakes, pies, and desserts. And you might not think much of that because that sounds typical for many of us when we go to funerals.
Sounds
That's
good
the food. But the reason it struck me is because that was shortly after I had lost a lot of weight. I had turned my own health situation around, and so I realized there was nothing there that I could really eat and yet keep my weight where I wanted it to be at a healthy weight. And I also struck me that there we were in the basement of the church at this, really celebrating the life of the deceased, and we were eating foods that were only going to make us sicker, that were going to make us fatter, and that were going to contribute to the next funeral being sooner rather than later. And that, it just didn't seem right to me. There was a disconnect there. So that's where I came up with this idea of funerals and fried chicken, to just remind people every day to think, what are the things that we're doing that might be contributing to us being sicker? And that might cause us to die earlier rather than live longer, more productive lives. And that's what funerals and fried chicken is all about.
Well, I know I see on your graphic of funerals and fried chicken, I'm noticing that I'm looking at this funeral and I see just African American people there, and I'm wondering, is there a message there? Is there a message there for us?
Actually, this, and you may be looking at a different tone, but if you look at it on the website, they're actually, the pastor there is actually Caucasian.
Okay.
Several of the people there are actually Latino.
Okay.
And then a few are African American. So we did try to make it diverse to really underline the point that this is not just an African American problem, that it truly is an American problem.
And I'm glad you pointed that out, because so often it is where we've heard that it was African Americans that had the problem with the worst obesity situations, but you're saying that it's a people problem.
As African Americans, we certainly do have problems in this area, but we are not the only ones.
We're not the only ones.
Absolutely not.
I can see Patricia's got a burning question.
You That's great that you brought up that point. But by and large, in most of the African American neighborhoods, that's where you have the more fried food places, the fast foods, and the unhealthy eating. So how can we conquer that as a whole? I mean, what are the things that you suggest in these, I guess, some of these communities so that they can practice healthier lifestyles?
Wow, how long do you have?
We have 30 minutes.
You know, I think a place to start is education. Understanding how, on a cellular level, certain foods contribute to our health, to our feeling better, being more energetic, and ultimately preventing disease and living longer. And how and why other foods contribute to the diseases that we know all too well, such as hypertension, heart disease, stroke, diabetes, these diseases that are so common, particularly in the African American community, but throughout America. And I think once people start to learn about how these foods are directly contributing to these diseases, to our sickness, to losing loved ones before their time, then people can start to understand, hey, you know, maybe I do need to make a change. And then we're about helping them to understand, well, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, and it is true that it's about 80% of what you put in your body that determines your health lifestyle, right?
Maybe even more than that.
Right. So it is my understanding that you yourself suffered with diabetes, cholesterol, some of the other obesity, but it was your doctor that told you about a book. What was that book?
Yeah, I was pre-diabetic. This was just a few years ago. I was pre-diabetic. I was quite obese. And you know, my blood pressure was tended to be kind of borderline. And fortunately, when I went to see my doctor, and my bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol was elevated. So my doctor said, you know, you need to make some changes. And I knew that myself as a physician all too well, but nevertheless, you know, I hadn't really done so until he brought it to my attention and said, today, you need to start making changes. And fortunately, rather than just starting me on prescription medications on that track, he suggested I read a book, which is called The China Study. It's written by Dr. T. Colin Campbell and his son. Dr. Campbell is a professor, a PhD in nutrition at Cornell University. And this book is, the New York Times called it the most comprehensive study, and I'm paraphrasing, on the most comprehensive study on the relationship between dietary factors and risks of developing disease.
Wow.
And what I learned from this book is that the food that I was putting into my mouth every single day was the reason why I was in this somewhat precarious health situation. And that within a few months, I could turn all this around and basically cure myself of all the things you just mentioned simply by changing the food I ate. And of course, some exercise as well.
And so did that help?
Oh, it absolutely did.
I can see.
Right, because we actually have a photo that we have in the background now that is showing what you look like at one point in your life. And that's, I wanted to go back a little bit to what you said about the repast, because as you were calling out those various foods, I was going back to my childhood. I was born in Gary, Indiana, but I was raised in Memphis, Tennessee, so I'm sort of a Southern girl here. And that was Sunday dinner, as well as when we would go to funerals. And I'm thinking that the fried chicken was usually coming out of a can of what is it, resurface, or we had used that grease more than one time, and that supposedly that made it season well.
Right.
And the cakes, tons and tons of butter, tons and tons of sugar, and I'm thinking the macaroni and cheese. Can you talk a little bit about the harm that is in some of it? Because I think some of us, we just don't get it. It tastes good to the palate, and you know,
it does taste good, particularly when you're used to eating that kind of food, as many of us are. And I think what I'm hearing from you, and I completely agree, is that this is cultural. These are foods that we, African Americans, particularly many people in the South, regardless of their race, are just used to eating these foods. But they're high in saturated fat. They cause us to have higher cholesterol. They also contribute to really a situation where we're food addicted. And most people don't think about food as being an addiction. We think of drugs, alcohol, things like that. But food truly is an addiction. Our taste buds get used to eating this salty, fatty, sugary food, and to the point where we have an addiction. I certainly consider myself a food addict. I think once an addict, you're always an addict. So I consider myself now a food addict in recovery. And the difference is, though, when I used to drive, I couldn't drive by a fast food place particularly if I hadn't eaten for a while, and just leave it there. I had to get my burger or get my fried chicken or fries or whatever, and I would get these cravings. But what Dr. Campbell taught me, and what I learned as I read more and more books, was that our taste buds actually adjust over time. And once we get away from those foods and start to eat more plant-based whole foods, and I mean vegetables, fruits, just as they come out of the ground, things like vegetarian chili and so forth, as we start to eat these kinds of fresh, whole, plant-based foods, our taste buds over a matter of weeks or just a couple months actually change. And those cravings start to disappear. So while now it might seem kind of, for a lot of people, impossible to give up this fried chicken and macaroni and cheese and so forth, it's actually not that hard. It may be hard for a couple of weeks, but after that time period, it's actually quite easy because your taste buds actually adjust.
Well, I'm amazed that you say that you can do this in just a couple of months.
Yes.
Is that with having some kind of cycle analysis?
Well,
psychotherapy?
I lost close to 60 pounds. That did not happen in 2 or 3 months. But what did happen is my taste buds adjusted. So I was able to make the dietary changes necessary that enabled me to lose that weight over a longer period of time. And that's what's more important, because it's not, we talk about weight so much in this country, but that's not really what this issue is. It's really about our health, the health of our cells in our body. And once we have healthy cells, by providing them the proper nutrients, lots of antioxidants, omega-3 fatty acids, things that we get from plant-based foods, that's when we're in a situation where, okay, now that our cells are healthy, you feel more energy. You feel like walking and exercising more. You're happier around your husband or your wife. It's just a better situation all the way around, and because you've beaten that food addiction. And once you beat that food addiction, what happens is the weight just starts the weight disappears little by little in a natural way. But this is not about a fad diet. This is about a lifestyle. It's something that you adopt at a particular time, and then hopefully you carry that through for the rest of your life.
Right. Wow. Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back with our co-host, Patricia Watts-Blackwell, and special guest, Dr. Ed James. Don't you touch that dial. When we come back, Patricia is going to have some questions.
Diet and exercise are never easy. Then again, neither is dying. Type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke kill nearly 1 million people a year. You can stop it starting right now. It's your life. Listen to your doctor. Eat better, get moving.
Welcome back. You're watching Skills to Pay the Bills in today's segment of The Real Secrets of Money with our special guest, Dr. Ed James, and co-host, Patricia Watts-Blackwell. Patricia.
Okay, going back. So I'm an insurance agent, and I deal with life insurance. But I deal with life insurance that you don't have to die to use. And so what I look at is statistics. And in the United States, there are over 70,000 people that are at the age of 100 or older. But we also see that trend of people's health still degrading around the 60-year age. But if they have bad habits, it's just irreversible based on their health issues at hand right now. And then what would you recommend for those people? How would you recommend that they change their lifestyle?
Well, I'd like to start by just discussing the biggest killer in the United States, and that's heart disease. Based on the food that we eat, what I call the standard American diet, SAD, this type of high fat, high sugar, high salt, principally animal-based type diet contributes to damage of our arteries, including those in our heart. And they create a situation where clot can form, and clogging up the vessel and causing a heart attack. Now here's the good news, that even if those vessels start to become damaged based on our diet and lifestyle, that damage actually, that narrowing of those vessels is actually been shown to be reversible through the type of plant-based whole food diet that we've been talking about today. And that's wonderful news. This has been shown through different types of, examinations that we call arteriography, where we inject contrast into the blood vessels to show that unequivocally these blood vessels that were very narrow, actually that narrowing can reverse. And I think that's tremendous. So for anyone who has known heart disease, and take actually President Clinton, for example, his situation, he is now eating a plant-based diet. He's given up his habit of eating burgers and other fast foods and so forth because he decided he wanted to live a long life and not die from heart disease. So even after all he's been through, having had heart surgery, he's decided to make these changes. And as a consequence, I think he's going to be just fine now in terms of his heart health.
Since I met you, Dr. James, just within my own family, education, like you said, it's all about education, and then it's about implementation, like that. And I have started telling my parents even to eat healthier. And I thank you for that piece.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, that's really great. And I'm sitting here thinking, everything you said, I get it, and I buy it, but it's hard to do. My question to you is, it's actually twofold. One is, what is your Heal to Be Free program like? Can you talk a little bit about what that program involves? And then the second part of that is, hey, I just went out and bought $200 worth of groceries in my house, and I want to get started on your program. Do I just throw all that stuff out and just go cold turkey? Are you there to help me through the process?
I think it's in terms of what the first step is, I think it's different for each person. Depending on what your goals are, depending on how your personality. Some people want to ease into this, and that's fine, little by little. Maybe it's better to just start, rather than getting rid of those groceries, just little by little replace them so that next time you go to the grocery store, you buy these kind of healthful foods that we've been talking about today. Other people will be like, well, now that I've heard this, I'm going to get rid of everything in my house and just go out and shop and buy all this new plant-based whole food, and that's what I'm going to do starting tomorrow. So there's that part of it. The other part is whether you do it by yourself or whether you'd like a helping hand. Through the website, through my website, dredjames.com, www.dredjames.com. On the services page, there's a company called My Own Care. My Own Care and my company, Heal to Be Free, have collaborated. And what My Own Care does is they provide that helping hand for you. You don't have to go anywhere. You do it right from your home. They have a coach that will talk to you on a weekly basis or a couple of times a month and help you through that process of getting rid of the foods that are causing you to be causing disease or obesity and so forth, and help you sort out which foods you should be replacing those with. So I think that's really useful for a lot of people because it is so counter to our culture, what we've been talking about today, that a helping hand like that I think is really helpful. And that actually, I have a cousin, he's a pastor in New Jersey, and this program was tremendously helpful to him. He lost about 30 pounds. He said he couldn't believe how easy it was once he got started, and now he snacks on nuts and berries instead of cornbread and other high-fat, high-calorie foods. So those are a couple options. And there are other people that will just go out and read a book or go to my website, learn all this information, and just say, I'm going to do it on my own. But I think for a lot of people, that helping hand is really useful.
Well, can you name, say, the 5 critical things that most people have in either their refrigerators or shelves that they absolutely need to get rid of to get started? And please don't say sugar. I know that's gonna be
You know, I would say it's tough. Well, I think by and large, more plants, less animal-based food.
So you mean greens
And when I yes, and when I talk about less animal-based food, you know, let's start with the the burgers, the steaks, and so forth. These foods.
no steaks?
Oh
boy,
Well,
okay.
but that's the other thing. You
Yeah.
know, it's different for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, for some people it might mean cutting back from red meat 5 days a week, you know, to 2 days a week.
Yeah.
You know, for me it meant cutting it out entirely. But that may be different, you know, for different people. But the important thing is, I think it is important to cut back on our red meat consumption in general for many Americans.
I have a question. I have heard that red meat can live in the body for days, not hours. Is that true?
Well, it's more difficult to digest than the healthful foods, the plant-based foods that, you know, that we've been talking about. So I don't know exactly how long it may hang around, but I do know this: in a number of ways, it does tend to be toxic to our bodies. It's been shown to be carcinogenic. So it does contribute to increased rates of cancer. Populations such as I mentioned in the China study, where they studied a Chinese population that eat very little red meat, their rates of all different types of cancer are much lower. And part of that is felt to be related to very low or virtually negligible red meat consumption in these rural Chinese societies.
Okay, so cut back on red meat.
Okay, so
plant-based, fried food.
Fried food is another thing. You don't want to have that in your refrigerator. You know, whether it's fried chicken or fried fish, prepare that food in a different way.
What about salt?
Well, that's the other thing. Certainly, you're hitting on all the big areas. Yeah, we certainly want to reduce our salt consumption. You really don't want to have a salt shaker on your table when you're eating your food, and you don't want to use it when you're cooking. There are a number of different herbs and spices that once you start to use them and take that salt away, you start to your taste buds really can begin to appreciate these natural ways of flavoring your food and not this processed salt that's usually used.
Okay, Patricia, you have a question.
So I know those are the things you said for us to try to avoid. One thing when I looked at your website that I saw you talking about was water. But what type of water? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Good question.
Well, I would say one thing I didn't realize until relatively recently was that distilled water is not something that anyone should be drinking. You can use it for other other purposes, but not it's not something we should be consuming as a beverage. It's generally not good for our health. The minerals that we have in our bones, when we drink lots of distilled water, they can be drawn out, and actually it can contribute to osteoporosis. So distilled water, I don't advise drinking. The other thing is I generally don't advise drinking tap water. There's fluoride in the tap water, and I understand that is felt to be good for your teeth, but it's a toxin. And it's a toxin, it's not good for your body in general. In addition to, there are contaminants that are often in tap water. And if you haven't had your tap water tested, you really should to find out exactly what's in it. So fluoride, chlorine, maybe some pesticides, maybe some pharmaceuticals which have been disposed of, which end up in our water system. All of these often are in our tap water. So what I do recommend is natural spring water. That's what I suggest you consider drinking.
Okay, thank you.
That is very helpful. I didn't even think about that, but as you were saying that about the pesticides and pharmaceuticals, I remember some years back where the animals were dying on the farms because of the water and the stuff that was in the water.
And
we had
our
crisis
water
almost with that.
It's scary. We had our water tested in our home very recently, just within the last few months. And some of these things that I've just discussed were found in our water, and that really frightened me. And so we made a change, and our family no longer drinks tap water.
Right. Well, Dr. James, we have a couple of minutes left, but I would like you to, in a way, I'd like you to have the last word before I close. And just what would you tell people that they need to do immediately? For those of us that, and is there an age, should we be starting this with our kids? Because our kids are obese, and that's a problem.
Yes.
So just share your heart.
Yeah, I think it's important that these kind of changes start at a young age, because the habits that we develop are more difficult to break with once we get middle-aged or older. It's just tough. If you've been doing something for 40 or 50 years, it's more difficult. On the other hand, if we start our kids at a young age eating these kind of plant-based whole foods, understanding the importance of health at a cellular level, getting their taste buds acclimated to these kind of healthful foods and not the salt and sugar and high-fat foods, then they can maintain that for the rest of their life much more easily. So I think that's real important. I'd like people to go check out my website. A lot of what we talked about and much more is available there. How heart disease, diabetes, strokes, hypertension, and many cancers are diseases that absolutely do not have to happen in most cases. They are preventable just by the food that we eat and the way that we live our lives. And my website is dredjames.com, DREDJAMES.com. And there are references there. There are books on the resource page, which can provide, those are books that, many of them that have been very helpful to me in making my lifestyle changes.
Recipes too?
And recipes as
Good.
well.
Good.
There are some links to recipes that are on my website, because I know, this is not the way that that many of us are used to cooking. It's different than what our culture is. So yes, I have links to recipes as well on my website. I would also encourage our listeners or those who are viewing today to connect with me. Once they go to my website, they can connect with me through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through Twitter. They can also sign up for my newsletter, which I send out every several months. So these are all ways that we can stay in touch, so that as more and more information becomes available to me, I'll certainly pass that on to those who wish to to tune in.
Well, you have certainly convinced me. I've been dealing with making some changes in my life, but I don't think anybody has talked to me as forthright as you have, and I really thank you for doing that. Well, folks, our time is just about up. It has been fun filling in for Shirley. She'll be back for the next segment. And I just want to thank Dr. Ed James for boldly teaching us how to add years to our lives by making better choices in our diet decisions and by moving our bodies more. I know we didn't get a chance to talk about that, but I could just tell that that was going to come there too, about the exercise. I also want to thank our wonderful co-host, Patricia Watts-Blackwell. If you desire to know more about the Real Secrets of Money segment, please email Shirley Lou at loushirley@gmail.com. Or if you want to know more about our show, Skills to Pay the Bills, please contact me, Tia Young, at skillstorock@gmail.com. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.